This is the second lecture on the reproductive system. We'll be discussing the female reproductive system on this lecture. First of all, the female reproductive anatomy consists of the ovaries, which are the gonads for the female. The ovaries produce female gametes, or the ova. They also secrete sex hormones such as estrogen and progesterone. There's accessory ducts for the female, which include the uterine tubes, the uterus, and the vagina. This picture illustrates the location of these structures. Vagina is in this passageway here, which connects to the cervix, and cervix is the beginning part of the uterus. The uterus is, or the womb is located here, and then coming out laterally from the uterus are ovarian tubes or fallopian tubes, and then the fallopian tubes are in close proximity to the ovaries. Here's another diagram here. It shows the vagina open in space. We come to the beginning of the uterus. This is the cervix. The cervix is kind of the opening of the uterus. The uterus is hollow inside. It's a very muscular organ. These are the muscles that produce contractions during delivery of a baby. These muscles generate quite a bit of force. But the interior of the uterus is connected to these uterine tubes, or fallopian tubes, another name for it, and they extend all the way out to the ovaries. They don't. The ovaries are not connected physically to these fallopian tubes, but they're in close proximity to the fallopian tubes. So that when ovulation occurs and the egg is expelled from the ovary, it's usually picked up by these fimbriae, or finger-like structures in the fallopian tubes. And the peristalsis type movement takes this egg down the fallopian tubes back towards the uterus. Like I said, the fallopian ducts have no contact with the ovary. Sometimes the oocyte, or the egg, is cast into the peritoneal cavity. Sometimes it gets lost there. Ideally, you'd want it to get picked up by the fallopian tubes, but sometimes it doesn't. When it does get picked up by the fallopian tubes, the tube carries the egg to the uterus, and the uterus is the site for the placenta and for the fetus. The vagina is where sperm are deposited and serves as a birth canal. We talk about the fallopian tubes. This receives the ovulated oocyte. The uterine tubes are the usual site of fertilization. The isthmus is the region where the tubes join the uterus. The ampulla is a distal region that curves around the ovary. The ampulla ends with the infundibulum near the ovary, and the ciliate fimbriae of the infundibulum creates currents that move the oocyte into the uterine tube. The oocyte is carried along by peristalsis and ciliary action. Here's those structures. You have the uterine tube, and it has infundibulum. It's infundibulum here towards the end of the uterine tube, and it has these fimbriae, but finger-like structures that try to entice the oocyte, which is ovulated, to come into the uterine tube. From there, site fertilization is in the uterine tube, and the oocyte migrates to the uterus, where it implants on the wall of the uterus. The uterus, or the womb, is a hollow, thick, muscular organ. Its function is to receive, to retain, and nourish the fertilized ovum. It's usually anteverted, which is inclined forward. Here's a picture of anteverted, leaning forward. But it can be retroverted. It can be retroverted backwards. There's a body of the uterus, is the main portion. There's a fundus, which is around the superior region, and the isthmus, which is a narrowed inferior region. Here's the body of the uterus, the main body. The fundus of the uterus is the top rounded portion, and the isthmus is this narrowed area towards the base of the uterus. The cervix is the narrow neck or outlet of the uterus, and it projects into the vagina. The cervical canal communicates with the vagina and communicates to the uterine body. Here's a picture of the cervix looking from this perspective. The 3 layers of the uterine wall are the perimetrium, which is a serous layer. It's visceral peritoneum. The myometrium is interlacing layers of smooth muscles. Again, think of muscle. Myometrium is muscle. Endometrium is the mucosal lining for implantation and placenta formation. Endometrium is the inner lining of the uterus. That's where the oocyte is implanted and where the baby grows. There's 2 layers of the endometrium. There's a stratum functionalis and stratum basalis, otherwise known as the functional layer and the basal layer. Stratum functionalis is toward the lumen of the uterus, and this changes in response to the ovarian hormone cycles. So this can change and alter. Stratum basalis doesn't change much. It's unresponsive to the hormones it uses to not shed during menstruation. But during the woman's period, all of this, the blood comes from the shedding of this stratum functionalis. This is all sloughed off and shed and is expelled through the vagina. And this results in the period. The vagina is a thin-walled tube. It serves as a birth canal. It receives semen during intercourse. It serves as a passageway for menstrual flow. The mucosa near the vaginal orifice forms an incomplete partition called a hymen, which ruptures with intercourse. The vaginal fornix is the upper end of the vagina surrounded by a cervix. Here's fornix. Fornix is like this little corner. The vagina surrounded by the cervix. There's posterior fornix and anterior fornix. The external genitalia is noted for the mons pubis, the fatty area overlying the pubic symphysis, the labia majora, which is this fatty skin folds covered with hair. This is the counterpart for the male scrotum, and the labia minora are skin folds lying within the labia majora. The clitoris is anterior to the vestibule. There's the glands of the clitoris and prepuce of the clitoris. Perineum is a diamond-shaped area between the pubic arch and the coccyx. It's bordered by the ischiotuberosities laterally. The ischiotuberosities are points on the ischial bones of the pelvis. Diagram shows the clitoris and the external urethral orifice, vaginal orifice, pubic symphysis, where the pelvic bones connect. Now, talk about the mammary glands. Basically, the mammary glands are modified sweat glands. There's 15 to 25 lobes. Their function is to produce milk. The areola is a pigmented skin around the nipple. Suspensory ligaments attach the breast to the underlying muscle. Lobules within the lobes contain glandular alveoli that produce milk. Milk is secreted into lactiferous ducts, which is secreted into lactiferous sinuses, and those open to the outside of the nipple. The size of the breast, though, is due to fat deposits. Here's the areola, the nipple, lactiferous duct, lactiferous sinus, which empties into the nipple. Now we'll talk about the process of oogenesis and process of production of the eggs. Before we do that, let's just review, for comparison's sake, the production of sperm. This is a review from the last lecture, but the spermagonium is the stem cell that starts it all. Stem cell splits from mitosis to daughter cell A and B. Daughter cell A remains as a stem cell for production of later sperm. Daughter cell B goes on through the process of becoming the sperm. Daughter cell B becomes primary spermatocyte, which then develops in secondary spermatocytes. So that's very similar to the oocyte production. If we now look at oogenesis, we have the stem cell is called oogonium as opposed to spermatogonium. You've got a primary oocyte as opposed to a primary spermocyte. You have secondary oocyte, which is as opposed to secondary spermatocyte. But you can see from this diagram, the oogonium stem cell has 2N. That means it has 46 chromosomes, twice the normal number of chromosomes. It has a pair of each chromosome. It divides by mitosis, and the daughter cell here produces a cell that has 46 chromosomes. And it grows in childhood. This all happens in childhood. Then once you hit puberty, until the time of menopause, then these primary oocytes can continue their process. Primary oocytes then continue, and they complete meiosis and divide into secondary oocytes. This primary oocyte actually forms a polar body and a secondary oocyte. This oocyte is the part that's ready for fertilization by sperm. When it's fertilized by sperm, it goes on to become a zygote and eventually forms into the fetus. The first polar body is remnant of a division of this secondary oocyte. The first polar body is usually just discarded, and it may split into two other polar bodies which are also discarded. The net effect of the oogenesis process is from one oogonium produces one ovum that can be fertilized and 3 polar bodies which are non-functional and basically don't serve a purpose. This is what's happening in the ovaries, or this is what happened with oocytes. In the meantime, there's follicles in the ovary. They undergo different patterns of change. These follicles surround the oocyte. You see the follicle cells surround the oocyte. As the oocyte is changing and going through its stages, the follicle actually goes through stages as well. We'll talk about the different stages of the follicle. The follicle surrounds the oocyte. So let's look at it. Oogenesis is the production of female gametes. Gamete is the female sex cells. It takes years to complete. It begins in the fetal period. Oogonia, the 2N ovarian stem cells multiply by mitosis and store nutrients. Primary oocytes develop in primordial follicles. Primary oocyte is in a primordial follicle. Primary oocytes begin meiosis and they stall in prophase 1. That's just one of the stages of meiosis. It stalls there. At birth, females are presumed to have their lifetime supply of primary oocytes. Each month after puberty, a few primary oocytes are activated. One primary oocyte is selected each month to resume meiosis. The result of first meiosis is 2 haploid cells of different sizes. There's a secondary oocyte, which is a large cell, has all cytoplasm and organelles of the original cell, and a first polar body. Here we have first polar body and the secondary oocyte. This all comes from this division of this haploid cell. Secondary oocyte stalls at metaphase 2, which is one of the stages of meiosis. This is also where ovulation occurs. Ovulation is when the follicle ruptures and releases the oocyte outside the ovary so that it gets picked up by the fallopian tubes. If it's penetrated by a sperm, the second oocyte completes meiosis too and yields an ovum and a secondary protobody. So if it's fertilized, it goes on to divide into ovum. This shows the same basic information. You have your oogonium stem cell, mitosis, produces primary oocyte, stalls out in infancy and childhood, but then puberty starts back again. So that each month, a primary oocyte is selected to go on to maturation. It goes on and starts to divide and stalls out during the second phase of meiosis. It's waiting for ovulation to occur and for penetration by sperm. If it's penetrated by sperm, it divides into ovum and secondary protobody. So there's ovarian cycle. There's two phases of ovarian cycle. There's follicular stage and luteal phase. Follicular stage is the period of follicle growth. It's the first 14 days. Day 1 is considered the day that the period starts. The first 14 days are the follicular stages. During this stage, the follicle grows and it ends about day 14 with follicle rupturing and releasing the oocyte. It's called ovulation. So it's follicular phase. The second phase is luteal phase. Luteal phase is a period of corpus luteum activity. Corpus luteum is what happens to the follicle after ovulation. It becomes swollen and eventually degenerates. So during the follicular phase, this is what's going on. The ovaries produce cells embedded in the cortex of the ovary. Ovarian follicles have immature egg, the oocyte surrounded by follicle cells and granulosal cells. You see the follicle cells surrounding the oocytes. There are several stages of development. This is primordial follicle, then becomes primary follicle, then the oocyte, secondary follicle. As it starts to get a space in here filled with fluid, it becomes a Graafian follicle. Eventually, the follicle is going to get to the point this is going to have so much pressure it's going to rupture, releasing the egg out of the ovary. And once it's released, then the follicle deteriorates and becomes corpus luteum, and eventually the corpus albicans. This basically says the same thing. The thing to know from this slide is basically the progression from primary follicle to primary follicle, to secondary follicle, to Graafian follicle, to ovulation, to corpus luteum, and eventually to corpus albicans. Another order, which the stages they go through. Now the luteal phase, we talk about the follicular phase first. Now the luteal phase is what happens after ovulation. These follicle cells, after ovulation, form the corpus luteum. Corpus luteum secretes progesterone and some estrogen, so it produces a lot of hormones. If the pregnancy does not occur, the corpus luteum degenerates into corpus albicans in about 10 days. If fertilization does occur, the corpus luteum produces hormones to sustain the pregnancy until the placenta can take over hormone production in about 3 months. So if pregnancy does occur, this corpus luteum continues to pump out progesterone and estrogen until the placenta is large enough to take over that function. Here's the different components of the menstrual cycle. There's the ovarian cycle, which happens in the ovaries. The follicles go from primary follicle to primary follicle, secondary follicle, grafting follicle, and ovulation, corpus luteum. Yes, that's why it's called the luteal phase, called corpus luteum, and eventually the corpus albicans. At the same time, what's going on with the hormones? You have progesterone and estrogen type hormones at a fairly low level. They gradually start rising. The estrogen rises, and that produces a very steep spike in the LH, luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone, when it spikes, that causes ovulation. This correlates to ovulation during the LH spike. That's at day 14. Just know that ovulation occurs at day 14. Day 1 is the first day of your period, so start counting at day 1. Day 14 is the optimal time to get pregnant, because that's when the ovulation occurs. Now, we talked about what goes on in the uterus. No, we talked about what goes on in the ovary. But at the same time, the uterus is undergoing changes as well. There's changes in the endometrium of the uterus as a result of ovarian hormone levels. There's 3 phases of change in the uterine or menstrual cycle. There's a menstrual phase, proliferative phase, and the secretory phase. The menstrual phase is when the shedding of the functional layer of the endometrium occurs. This results in the bleeding, or the period. Proliferative phase rebuilds the functional layer of the endometrium. The secretory phase begins immediately after ovulation. Enrichment of the blood supply and glandular secretion of nutrients prepares the endometrium to receive an embryo. So the menstrual phase. During this phase, the uterus sheds all but the deepest layer of the endometrium. Gonadotropins begin to rise. That's the LH and FSH. They start to begin to rise here. Ovarian hormones are at the lowest normal level. Stratum functionalis is shed. Menstrual flow for 35 days. By day 5, the growing ovarian follicles produce more estrogen. Again, remember this slide. This is the stratum functionalis of the endometrium. This is the layer that's shed during menstruation. Stratum basalis is not shed. Fluctuating levels of ovarian hormones of estrogen to progesterone cause endometrial changes of the uterine cycle. High estrogen level is also what's responsible for the LH-FSH surge, which, as I said before, the LH surge is what causes ovulation. So then the menstrual phase first, and then we have the proliferative phase, which is from day 6 to 14. This is pre-ovulation. Endometrium rebuilds in itself. So the period is over, and the endometrium is starting to rebuild itself. Ovulation occurs at the end of the proliferative stage. The secretory phase. This corresponds to the luteal phase of the ovarian cycle. So this is the secretory phase is after day 14, and this luteal phase of the ovarian cycle at the same time. During this phase, the endometrium prepares for embryo to implant. The default response is fertilization occurs, and the endometrium has to get ready for implantation of the embryo, so the embryo can grow, placenta can form. Of course, that's not what happens most of the time, but that's what it's designed to do. So the 3 phases of the uterine cycle are the menstrual phase, proliferative phase, and the secretory phase. After the secretory phase ends, the menstruation starts over again, and the process repeats. If fertilization does not occur, the corpus luteum degenerates toward the end of the secretory phase. Progesterone levels fall. The spiral arteries in the outer layer or in the inner layer of the endometrium kink and spasm. The endometrial cells die and regress. Spinal arteries constrict, and and this functional layer sloughs off. Look at the effects of the hormones. Estrogen has some certain effects. Estrogen promotes oogenesis and follicle growth in the ovary. It has a short, rapid, but short-lived growth spurt at puberty. That's why girls often get taller than their male counterparts at puberty, because estrogen gives a rapid growth spurt. Also, estrogen induces secondary sex characteristics such as the growth of breasts, increased deposition of subcutaneous fat, and widening and lightening of the pelvis. Effects of progesterone. Progesterone works with estrogen to establish and regulate the uterine cycle. It promotes changes in cervical mucus. The effect of placental progesterone in pregnancy is to inhibit uterine motility and to help the breast prepare for lactation. And you just need to know these terms. Thelarchy is the time of breast development. Pubarchy is the growth of axillary and pubic hair. Menarche is the first menstruation. And menopause is when menstruation ends.